very pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, David Barber. David has progressed far from the days when I first met him as classmates in the Department of Architecture at Carnegie Mellon University. And get a sense of what it looked like back then. This is the College of Fine Arts building.
Isn't that you in the car, Jim?
Well, there's plenty of cars here. David and I were classmates, and that's his car on the left, a convertible. He always had the better car. He always had the better passenger in the car, too. Mine's the first Mini on the right there. But
We're not that old.
we don't look that old here. This is at commencement. Here we are, at commencement. There's David Barber, and this is a strange guy back here. So it's only about 2 to 3 years ago. And walking down towards commencement just in front of the building you saw previously, and maybe not quite ready to conquer the world here, but ready to give it our best. And David went from Pittsburgh to New York City, where he worked for F.J. Siami Construction Company and Myers and Shipp Architects and Planners before establishing his own practice, David Barber Architects, in 1985 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. His small, creative architectural studio does a variety of project types ranging from single-family homes to large-scale urban planning projects. Notable projects include the AI Connecticut Design Award-winning Bridgeport Ferry Terminal Building in Bridgeport Harbor, Connecticut Audubon Birdcraft Museum in Fairfield, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation Award-winning Washington Park Historic Preservation Project. In addition, he received a State of Connecticut Legislature Award for Community Service for his work on the Gateway to Bridgeport project. David has appeared recently on National Public Radio and Huffington Post Live for his expertise on waterfront design. Numerous articles on David's work have appeared in the New York Times, Connecticut Magazine, the Hartford Courant, and the Bridgeport Post. His work was included in Taunton Press's architectural monograph, Updating Classic Colonial Homes. And a recent retrospective of David's work was held at the Discovery Museum in Bridgeport. In addition to practice, David is a visiting critic for the architecture programs at Rhode Island School of Design, Housatonic Community College, and right here at the University of Hartford. He is currently an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Hartford in our department, teaching architectural hand drawing and rendering. Besides running a successful practice, David also finds time to give back to his community. He is the current board member of the Bridgeport Neighborhood Revitalization Zone, a member of the board of directors for the Bridgeport Chamber of Commerce, and a member and past president of the Black Rock Community Council. Please join me in welcoming David Barber.
Thank you very much, Jim. Professor Fuller, I mean, that's probably how you know him. This you're gonna have to bear with me. I don't know how all this cool stuff works here. When Jim asked me to give a lecture, I thought, you know, what am I gonna do he wanted me to give it about my practice, and I wasn't sure how to begin. You know, what is it I've been doing since 1985? You know, and it was kind of a good opportunity to sort of think about what I've done over the years. And one of the things I've done is I like to dress up in period costume with human hair wigs and appear in parades. Those are real ship barrels and a real antique ship wheel. Now, this may not seem to have a whole lot to do with architecture, but it does actually have to do with my own practice, believe it or not. This is some folks from the community. I got some carpenters and some other folks. We built this float in one day, and there's a little SketchUp model of the float. And Jim neglected to mention that the most important award that I got was Best Parade Float in the Black Rock Community Council Annual Parade. The reason that I wanted to show you this is that involvement in my community is the way my practice started and the way it evolved. When Jim and I got out of school in 1979, I thought, what do I want to do? I want to do museums, I want to do restaurants, I want to do community centers, I want to do affordable housing, I want to do fancy houses in Greenwich. But there was a recession, not unlike now. There was a shortage of jobs in the architecture profession. I was able to find a job at a shipbuilding company in Newburgh, New York called Steel Style Incorporated. This is a dry dock in Norfolk, and that thing at the very end, it's a pointer, is a dry dock caisson gate. My job was to help create shop drawings of these steel caisson gates and barges and so forth, which I actually learned a lot. I learned a lot about steel shapes, about pipe railings, about welding, so it was very beneficial. But my point being is that you don't just have to work for an architectural firm, because I couldn't find a job. This is the dry dock full. But I kind of wanted to get more into the building construction end of things. So I got a job with Siami Construction, general contractors in New York City. Frank studied architecture. Frank Siami studied architecture, and he was a really interesting guy. Has worked with some of the best architects in the country. He built the Cooper Union Architecture School. Maybe you guys are familiar with it in Manhattan. This is it finished. And I learned a lot from Frank. I also learned that general contracting in Manhattan, I wasn't really cut out for. So I wanted to go to work for, I got a job. Things were getting heated up more. There was more work going on. My apprenticeship, I served, which I assume you guys still have to serve an apprenticeship before you get your license. I worked for a firm called Mayers and Schiff in Manhattan. And one of the projects we did was the TKTS booth for discount theater tickets, day of the performance. But we were dealing with super graphics and this sort of lightweight tubular frame. And this is actually what's there now. If you guys, I think this is the coolest TKTS thing, this sort of Spanish steps with these luminous, translucent red steps you can sit on and enjoy the life and activity of Times Square. But I kind of began to want to, the kind of work that I did at Mayers and Schiff was I worked on 2 subway stations, because at that time it was mainly publicly funded projects that were started more than privately funded. I worked on the 51st Street station in Lexington Avenue and in Borough Hall in Brooklyn. Learned lots about ceramic tile, glass tile restoration. I also learned that you have to assume anybody that goes into a subway station is carrying a baseball bat or a hockey stick and is going to whack the wall. So everything we designed had to be durable as heck. Glazed brick, steel, it just was an assumption, plus people would relieve themselves. We had to figure on that. But I kind of wanted to get into my own practice. Now, these are not my first projects in my own practice. The way I started out, after I finished my apprenticeship and got my license first in the state of New York, I developed a relationship with an architect in New Jersey, Gus Morpurgo, who Professor Fuller actually did some work with too. And I freelanced for him. He was in New Jersey, I was in Connecticut. And this is an office building. That's an office building down there. This was a hotel, which I helped design for him. So I was helping to pay the bills. I think by this time I had a little baby son, and I had to figure out some way to pay the bills, but I wanted to establish my own practice. So I was working at this scale in my freelance work. Meanwhile, my own projects were this scale. This is quite a fancy little screen porch in Fairfield, Connecticut. And what I got pleasure from was kind of really thinking about the details of these little projects that I started, decks, porches, things like that. You can see this is the light monitor at the top, and I was kind of beginning to explore these. You can see there's rings with chains at the top, and then these kind of cables with turnbuckles and a ring to keep the structure together. But this was the scale that I started at. I mean, I wasn't a wealthy guy and had lots of connections and stuff like that. I had to kind of start the bottom. This is an entrance to a house in Westchester County. And you'll notice that I do a lot of hand drawing. I've always loved to draw by hand, and I think it's very important, especially when you're sitting across the table from a client. And I'd like to encourage you to take my class too. But the ability to kind of draw something in real time, interacting with a client across the table is a really magical thing. They see something that they're helping to create. And I sit with a client and they get quiet as you sort of draw out something that you're talking about back and forth. This is another just sort of sketch of a family room that I did. This was over in South Salem, New York, which was the first time I was published. It was an antique 18th century house, post and beam, which was a kind of very interesting construction type to work on in a very historic home. This is a house on the waterfront. It's the entrance portico to a house in Mamaroneck, New York, with a view of Manhattan. And you can see the high-end residential projects that I did. I was much more interested in urban work, work in the city, work for nonprofits, but I learned how to pay the bills by doing fancy houses in Fairfield County. And for me, the expensive homes have a lot to do with craft, with materials, but they have to do with one family. That's what they're about. And so, for me, it was kind of an interest in design elements, lighting, things like that. But they didn't benefit lots of people, but they did pay my bills. This was an important project that I did not get paid for. When I moved, actually 1989, my wife and I had recently moved to this neighborhood, which is in the western part of, This is the Boston Post Road. It's about 2 miles of the Boston Post Road as it passes through Bridgeport. Downtown Bridgeport is here. You cross this bridge, this is Fairfield. So Long Island Sound is down here. And some business leaders discovered that I was an architect, a young architect. And this street is a straight road. The Post Road, as it passes through this part of Bridgeport, is a state highway. And it was falling apart. The sidewalks were deteriorated, the curbs, the lighting, half the lights were not there. There were street trees that had been knocked over by cars. It was a mess. And they had an idea to go to the state of Connecticut and ask for money to repair and restore the main commercial route in Black Rock. And they said, Dave, can you help? And I said, sure. And I created this sort of drawing and then these little vignettes. I thought this was kind of a fun thing. It was a gateway into the city of Bridgeport from Lower Fairfield County. This is the Black Rock section of Bridgeport. So we made these kind of black rock pylons here and a bridge. This was the gateway, the kind of fun with the metaphors. I did this drawing. It was about, Jim, you said about how big was this thing? I think it was about maybe 4 feet wide, pen and ink. Then I colored it up. I did a very simple cost estimate. One prominent businessman from the neighborhood and I drove up to Hartford. We met with the state legislature's, I guess it was Transportation Committee, and our legislators. So there was 3 of us. And we presented this concept for the improvements, the streetscape improvements, and they gave us $2.5 million. And I was just amazed at that. I mean, there were other folks involved, but my drawing did that. And it made a significant impact on my community. And it was pro bono. But it was important, and it got me while I didn't get paid, I got some recognition. The architect makes dream reality with Fairfield Avenue transformation plan, and I contributed my time, talent, energy to go. But people began to know who I was. Again, I didn't get paid, but I did something that I thought was worthwhile, and I began to meet people as a result of it. One of my favorite parts of this was, this is our state rep, Lee Samowitz. This is me with a cocktail in my hand. This is the lighting ceremony to turn on the 2 miles of streetlights. And I made this huge light switch here. You see this? And the 2 politicians had to turn it on. It was great. I loved it. This is the mayor, Joe Ganim, who went away for a little while, but he's back. My favorite part was this picture in the paper with the huge light switch that I got them to turn the lights on. This is the finished, I don't have it before, but I got a community service award from the state legislature for my work on this. And the next thing I started to do, so I was involved in my neighborhood, is I thought, okay, let me see I'm going to try being a real estate developer. And this building, cool little 3-story building, downtown Bridgeport, $140,000, some homeless guy living in the basement, a real mess. And I thought, well, let me see if I can figure out a way to buy this. Well, I couldn't buy it. But the guy that did buy it, I got to know, and he had lots of money. And he said, David, you're an architect, would you help me restore this? Help me do some marketing to get tenants. So I did. And this particular man, Ernie Treves, happened to own 40 McDonald's restaurants, which are very lucrative. And with all that hamburger money, he bought lots of real estate. So I then gravitated into McDonald's. This is a play place in Waterbury, Connecticut. I had some fun with, you see, the original McDonald's had this banded red and white ceramic tile and these golden arches. So I had some fun playing with this. These are, just from an economic point of view, McDonald's has discovered if you have a little indoor playground, the mothers stay longer and have coffee and have lunch while their kids are playing in the playground, and they're real economic engines. I do remember at the grand opening, my daughter was a little kid in diapers. We're all walking around with champagne in this play place, and there's an overhead tube up here, and it started to leak, and somebody said, the roof's leaking, it's what? Well, it turned out my daughter had a little accident, and we quickly got some diapers. This is just a kind of a sketch. These are 2 sketches of concepts for play place entrances to a McDonald's in Milford, right off the highway. That's something clients like to see as alternatives too, lots of different possibilities. So you can see these are very different kinds of studies. More recently, McDonald's has developed new design standards to replace the 1970s mansard roof McDonald's, which were originally created to fit into residential areas. And so I, along with hundreds of other architects that do work for McDonald's, began to learn about this new aesthetic model, which does a lot of stainless steel and internally lit perforated metal awnings and porcelain enamel panels, and it's cool. It's a cool thing. gradually I started to get a reputation in McDonald's as being one of the few that was a little creative. So there's a hospital down in Westchester County that was building a new wing, and it had a food court in it. It was for children's hospital, kids with rare diseases, and they wanted to add a McDonald's to the food court, and somebody donated a locomotive engine. So what I thought would be kind of fun is to make a little train depot, with the train that the kids could go into and, pretend that they were, taking a trip in their imagination. As I got involved in Bridgeport, and I got involved in the Bridgeport Chamber of Commerce, eventually became on the board of directors, I discovered that there was a project in the works to rebuild the little ticket booth down at Bridgeport Harbor, where, as it turns out, 800,000 vehicles a year, 800,000 people a year cross between Long Island and Connecticut on the ferry, and they were going to rebuild this little sort of shack. And I thought, you know what, this is significant. There ought to be something more substantial as the entrance into the state of Connecticut by water across Long Island Sound. So I talked to the director of the Port Authority, and then before the mayor went away, I talked to him. He said, we got to get some more money, and we got to do something more significant here. So this is a ferry terminal building in Bridgeport Harbor. I thought I'd show you this because there was an interview process to select the architects that would work on it. This was one of the things we presented during that interview in addition to past work. It's called the Opportunity and Constraints Board, which what we did is we demonstrated our understanding of some of the positive opportunities, some of the constraints of designing without designing a building, because we didn't really have the specific program yet, but we knew the site. So you have things like, I-95 is kind of an aggressive sound thing, as is the railroad tracks. You've got view to the open sound. You've got circulation that can come in under the bridge, under the railroad tracks. So this demonstrated to the client, the selection committee for the architect. And I thought it might be interesting for you guys to know how this works. This was a publicly funded project, so it was a public process for selecting the architects. I also did this in conjunction with, it was a joint venture with Fletcher Thompson. I was the design architect, and then they did the construction documents and engineering and so forth. This was a little model that we built. I usually try to have a student intern every summer, and this is internally lit basswood model. It was kind of cool. Still have it in a case. And so we did, and the New York Times did a little piece on it. This is the finished building. I thought that would be a good place for people to make speeches up there. And a couple of metaphors I again was dealing with was bridges and the prow of a boat kind of coming out. This is an aerial. You can see the building here and the way the traffic queues up to go to it. Back to the fancy houses, the people in New Canaan, because I had to pay some bills. So here's again, hand drawing. I love to draw by hand, and people like to look at hand drawings too. It's not to say that the kind of drawings most of you guys are really good at are not cool drawings, but sometimes a softer drawing elicits certain emotional reactions from other human beings. Client in Fenwick on the coast wanted a new stone pier, sailboat. This is a family room, kitchen. Again, it has to do with the detail. And to be honest with you, what I've learned, because I have 3 kids and a family and a mortgage to pay, people like houses that feel like homes, that feel like houses. I mean, as when I was your age, I had every intention of doing wild, totally unique, very modern houses, which occasionally I still get the chance, but by and large, people want a well-detailed, well-thought-out, well-designed place that makes them feel like they're home. That's my experience, and that's a piece of my practice is doing that. Meanwhile, back to the city, my favorite building type, museums. This is McLevy Hall, which was the original city hall in downtown Bridgeport, and Housatonic Community College has an extensive art collection and no place to display it. So People's Bank hired us to design an art museum, to convert the building to an art museum. It's currently, it was at that time being used for record storage, which I think was a tragedy. So we did a temporary exhibits edition. This is more modern. And then a performance stage here. And this is me sitting there watching the play. There were the existing light monitors up on top, and what we did is we sort of carved this atrium through as a kind of organizational device and to let light down through all the gallery spaces. This is who I think was a speaker here, Richard Meyer, Meyer's People's Bank headquarters. I'm pretty sure he got paid more than I do. He's important. This is Mr. Hamburger's building, among others. It's next to the People's Bank headquarters. It's the tallest building in Bridgeport, lots of offices. We do all the space planning for his tenants. And this is the president's office up in the penthouse for an oil trading company. We worked around the structural frame. In the 90s, there was talk of bringing casino gaming to Bridgeport, being right outside of New York. There were those who thought that it would be an economic boon to the city, and Donald Trump and Steve Wynn, who, by the way, is practically blind. I don't know if you knew that, but I didn't know that, and I went up and started showing him a drawing, and somebody grabbed my arm and said, "Can't see, don't do that." You asked Jim how big this drawing was, like about 7 feet long. And it was about all the different kinds of projects that were going on in the city, in addition to the possibility of having these casinos down in the harbor. It was to show that there was lots of things happening at different stages in the city. And our client was, because I had gotten involved in downtown Bridgeport, and our client was the Bridgeport Regional Business Council. They were trying to leverage marketing the city on top of this potential casinos coming to the city. Fancy house, kind of like this. This is you drive the car through here, and the garage is from the back. This is sort of this octagonal element. It's a very cool floor plan to this. But this is a Greenfield Hill. Again, what I was doing was I would kind of earn my income down in the wealthy part of Fairfield County and Westchester. And in one morning, I'd go down and meet a client there, and then come up in the afternoon and talk to people about affordable housing on the east side of Bridgeport. And I love that contrast. Another nice house. Most of these are by the water view. This was Congressman Chris Shays' house on the water. Hand drawing, once again. This is an actress, Catherine Hayes. She's overlooking the water also. This is a community center, and the model here, what played very much like that Gateway project, where there was no money in the beginning. It was a primarily empty building here, which had been a center for single women that was empty with a bunch of bedrooms in it. And some folks in the community said, you know what, we could really use a community center, places where we could meet and, you know, do art classes and cooking classes and so forth. And these guys came to me and said, Dave, you want to try this one again, see if we can do it. So I did these preliminary sketches, some budgets, we went to the state, got millions of dollars. It works. And this time I got selected to be the architect of it. So we did and I had never done a community center. And this is the way I got to do projects, that I wanted to do this kind of project. And so I just jumped in and did them. I wasn't getting paid for it, but I thought it was worthwhile. One thing leads to another, and I got hired to be the architect, having never done one before. And I had to compete with other architects who had done a bunch of work like this. I worked on a drug rehab facility in the east side of Bridgeport that catered to the sort of drug addict kids of wealthy down county people very discreetly. It was private. Anyway, one of the board members at that drug rehab place was also a board member at this museum, which is in Fairfield. It's the Connecticut Audubon Birdcraft Museum. It's a bird sanctuary around a wonderful little pond, very private. This drawing, by the way, is about 3 feet by 2 feet. I printed it on brown craft paper. At this time, I think I was using a program. It was a CAD, just AutoCAD drawing that I used squiggle with, just to sort of squiggle the lines. I don't know if you guys still use that, but and then those are Prismacolors, just a sort of Prismacolor over it. But I think it has a nice softness to it. We used lots of stone. This is this pergola are from native cedar trees that were on the property, and you can see how we use this sort of rustic detail. We slotted the logs with sort of code compliant balustrade there that you know, made these railings. But it was kind of cool and rough. This was the Welcome Center. It used to be the Caretaker's Cottage, which we created a gift shop, made a little place for they had limited employees, volunteer organization, so I made it round so the one person could survey the whole place. Some nice stonework. This is an entrance to the sanctuary where that stair comes down. And this is a friend of mine who's a photographer, and I said, let's try to capture the wonder of learning. So she got her niece and nephew to sort of run down towards the entrance to the museum, which I thought was kind of a cool idea. And that's, for me, museums are the most interesting building type because they're all about, first of all, they're nice people involved. They're usually pretty smart. And it's about learning. It's not about money. I mean, McDonald's is about hamburgers and money, and I get that. That's part of what we do. But museums are about something else, and that's why I love to work on them. Historic preservation. Washington Park is a park on the east side of Bridgeport. This is P.T. Barnum's. This is P.T. Barnum's house, the circus impresario. And Washington Park was where all the movers and shakers of industry lived in the late 19th century, much as Greenwich or Southport are now. And there were these wonderful stately homes. By the 70s, they had fallen into severe disrepair. You can see burned out. There's all kinds of drug activity. It was a really rough area. My nonprofit client got some historic tax credits to restore the buildings, and we can adaptively reuse them as multi-unit affordable housing. These are apartments. We got 36 apartments in 10 buildings. These are before and after pictures, careful research on the color and detail. And we won a national award for historic preservation. Another Fairfield County house, new house. Gallery. This is where we were working with the development of this sort of very public zone of entrance and keeping the vehicles behind. The front was porches, streetscape, the kind of public-private side of the buildings. This is affordable housing. This is 60 acres in Milford, where I worked with a landscape architect on a Girl Scout camp, which was another. You see the variety of project types. I didn't want to just do one. I wanted to get involved. What I did discover, it takes a hell of a lot of boxes of cookies to be sold to pay for this kind of a building. But this is a lodge that we did in a pool structure. I thought this was kind of an interesting drawing that the landscape architect did, where the vertical elevation is double what the horizontal is for emphasis. People, especially in wealthy areas, my clients discovered will care a lot about their dogs and cats and will pay a lot to have them taken care of. And the idea here was to develop a chain of facilities where animals get groomed and are boarded, because a lot of boarding facilities, kennels. We did these, had a lot of fun with this. Made little beach cabanas for Fido to sit in the sand and sit in a cabana. We had little beauty parlors inside for the cats to get little ribbons in their hair and stuff like that. And you could watch, if you were on vacation in Disney World, we had this real-time video that you could watch them playing with your pet while you were vacationing. So it was kind of a fun thing. This I did with Shell Oil's got 3,500 stations, and came to an industrial design firm that then came to us to look at different ways to generate more revenue at each station, because, and this is before you see all these convenience stores, so we had a car wash and different kinds of high-end vending machines that you could buy fish bait in and loaves of bread. This is, let's see, Pfizer makes Lipitor, and there's 2 Indian casinos up around Ledyard, and my client got an option for 40 acres. This drawing is about 3 feet by 2 feet, and this is a site plan study of developing a 55 and over community. As people like Professor Fuller and I age, we need special places that we can live on one level. This is another site plan study exploring ideas about public kind of squares and green spaces. And I convinced my client that on this side of the road, which is part of the property, that we should include a commercial component. So this was the site plan that we presented to the town, which has the meeting house green there with a community building, and then this sort of commercial area in the residences around. And this is just a kind of a sketch vignette I did of the commercial, which I think it's very important to always, when you're showing like a site plan, which is, which is great and colorful and engaging, but I think it's important to show a client the feel for what it looks like at ground level. And I always, and in juries here, I do that. I talk about, you're going to show the large scale, but give a client or a juror a sense of what it will feel like at street level. And always sign your work, because it's art. Fancy house. They had a 14-foot ceiling and an unfinished basement, so we helped them renovate it. This is kind of a quirky but busy Mexican restaurant on Fairfield Avenue. My client, Miguel Tomaso, wanted to make it authentically Mexican. It's not really authentically Mexican. I said, where is the most authentically Mexican place you can think of? He said, there's a town called Oaxaca, Mexico, that is a beautiful old town. And I said, well, if I'm going to do this right, you got to send me there. So he did. And it was beautiful. Just really a beautiful place with wonderful public squares. This is, I landed in Mexico City, got lost, didn't speak Spanish, so it was kind of fun. And finally got a car, drove 7 hours south to this wonderful town, outdoor dining. And while I was there, I began to sketch. You can actually see this is the hotel stationery, this kind of converted monastery, which was cool. But I was really trying to absorb the culture and the feel for this is again, a travel sketch, which I was thinking about this little restaurant in Bridgeport, Connecticut while I was in Mexico. More drawings, same stationery. And this is the makeover with the outdoor dining, and you can see the stucco, and I really was trying to, that's one thing I like to do is work in different vocabularies. There's no sort of regular style that I have. I like to work on what's appropriate. This is the site plan where he added a parcel for parking. 2 young New York developers bought this building, a medical office building in Bridgeport, and wanted to convert it to residential. This was one of the early concept sketches, which was to do a sort of retail on the ground floor. There was extra land behind that we proposed a future tower, outdoor terrace space for each apartment, a rooftop green space. This is a site plan. This was a sketch I did. One of the ideas with these outdoor terraces, in a porte cochere, but these kind of interesting little pavilions that people would pay a premium for with their own garden and 2-story spaces. And we did this kind of interesting canopy. These are the apartments inside now. Pequannock Housing Project was a massive, terrible public housing project that was in the way of a stadium, the baseball stadium that was going to be built. So it had to be demolished, which I think was a good thing. The design and built people were housed like animals, and they had to be same number of units had to be replaced elsewhere in the city. But rather than build a single block or even a complex of low-income housing, the idea was to build infill housing in neighborhoods that had vacant lots, burned out houses, so you'd start to mend and repair. So we were hired to work on dozens of sites, develop multiple prototypes that could fit into these neighborhoods. This happens to be a 2-family house, each with its own entranceway, porch, identity. This was, again, one of my interns helped make this with the light inside. I like that. This is showing a configuration. It was a larger property with outbuildings behind it's kind of a new urbanist approach created a private outdoor space between the main buildings and the outbuildings. There were apartments above, the garages in the back. So this was designed as a system that could be replicated. We designed several different unit types. This is a cool project. This was a retail store, FW Woolworth, 100 by 100 footprint, floor plate, property, line wall on the left and on the right, so no windows, and these were small windows, which is appropriate for a retail facility. You want lots of wall space to display, but my client wanted to convert it to residential, which is tough. There's a market for downtown residential, but you get 100 feet in either way with no natural light. It's a tough thing to do. So what we did was we inserted a new tower in the middle and sort of carved out this interstitial space between the relic of the old masonry wall, and that let light in from above, gave people outdoor green space within the structure, left the heavy concrete structure intact. So you can see every apartment had outdoor space, natural light, and the tower comes out of the middle of the building, retail down on the ground floor. Once again, a hand drawing. But we do, Javier in my office does do Photoshop with the reflection in the glass. I thought that was kind of cool. That last project led to this one, which was he had an existing building. My client, different client, had an existing building downtown Bridgeport, wanted to add residential, so we added a glass structure on top of this existing two-story masonry building. This is a bank building in Black Rock that was empty, and an art center wanted to move into it. They had no money, but I thought, cool idea, let me help. Again, no fee, just jumped in, did some drawings, proposed to do this sort of high, very cool loft apartment building on the extra land beyond it, outdoor cafe in the courtyard. While this did not materialize, a real client with real money offered to buy the building to put a restaurant in it with apartments behind. So there again, I kind of just got involved in something which I thought was kind of interesting, and it led to a commission. This is the restaurant courtyard there. This is a house in Michigan that they loved, New England shingle style homes from the late 19th century, so I had some fun with turrets. Paying the bills. This is an interesting office building where I kind of was thinking about a sort of thick, on the left side, this sort of thick zone where it has stairs and mechanical and storage and stuff like that, and then there were open floor plates for the office. This is facing south with a brise soleil up here, outdoor terraces, and then 2 levels of parking that each came in on grade. The site plan. My kids' school didn't have a gymnasium, and they had to get bused over to the other side of town, so a friend of mine who owns a coffee shop, and his kids went there. We talked about it one day. We really need one. I started doing some sketches. He said, this is cool. He was a charismatic guy, started to talk it up. We got enough people interested, got some fundraising going, got permission from the diocese to build it after we had restored the church. So I helped restore St. Anne's Church, and then we built the gym. Kind of playing with the brick detailing, and there were these sort of stones in the brick wall. These are big overhead glass doors so that in addition to basketball, big dances in the evening, people could flow in and out. This is a light monitor on top, which also evacuates air so they wouldn't have to always run the air conditioning. It could pull out hot air. We helped convert the former convent into a daycare center. This is a new house, 7,000 square foot house for one guy who liked French things. Had a huge closet. This is the auto court. But again, you can see this doesn't look like that Mexican restaurant. It's I got into a French vernacular, which I found interesting, with real stucco, stone detailing. That is a pineapple there. And this is tucked into the hillside, the garden. This was for the client's name was Fred Frasinelli. I don't know if you guys ever heard of E&F Construction, but it was, I think, the largest construction company in Connecticut, and one of the largest in New England. E&F, it was Epifano and Frasinelli. This was the son of the founder of E&F. Back to the Hamburger King, who also owned a hotel. So we helped them renovate 200 rooms of the hotel, looked at color schemes for the exterior, new front. And I had a residential client who was a volunteer at the Discovery Museum. This was a cool project. I got to know the exhibit director and planetarium director. One of their ideas was to do this sort of forest, come out the back of the building into the forest with these spherical things that you could look at birds' nests and stuff like that. So I thought would be kind of cool. And creating out in front a brand new state-of-the-art planetarium, which would be highly visible on Park Avenue. And the planetarium director, these guys are bright Harvard guys, scientists. He wanted to make this whole spherical stainless steel globe with people inside of it floating in water so that somebody could come up and just touch it and move this sphere, which I thought would be tricky with the plumbing, piping, and stuff like that. But I thought it was a cool idea, you know. He was talking about physics. He was thinking about physics, you know. So there's the little sphere in the front that's sitting in a pool of water. And again, I just went up there and I said, look, guys, I'm an architect. I want to work on this museum. What can I do? There was no project, but they got excited that they had an actual architect that was interested. And they didn't have any money, but we had fun together. So this is this thing where the pendulum with people in it, so they learn about the rotation of the Earth and gravity, kind of a wacky astronaut trainer ride. But by doing that, when there became a real project that was funded, they hired me. So by just jumping into something, because I wanted to do it, it eventually leads to a commission for the kind of work that I wanted to do. They did an exhibition on the history of the museum. They asked me to help them research and put it together. And then that led into an invitation to have an exhibition of my own work at the museum, which was kind of cool. I better start picking up the pace. You guys are going to fall asleep or leave. Should be refreshments here, Jim, you know, alcoholic. There's a thing called state legislation. It's called Neighborhood Revitalization Zone, which I think is primarily targeted at the cities. And the basic concept is, rather than when you're kind of revitalizing a neighborhood in these urban areas, rather than have professional planners from the top down decide what's best for communities, to engage the members of the community and have a bottom-up planning process. So there's the legislation dictates that there's about 7 or 8 neighborhoods in Bridgeport that people get organized, form a structure, organizational structure, and then begin to brainstorm about what they want to happen in their community. And part of that process includes community design charrettes, which are cool. On a Saturday, they'll open up a cafeteria at one high school in the neighborhood. I volunteered to go to this one. I had a group of people sitting around the table, and they told me what they wanted, and I drew it. Again, the fact that I was able to kind of hand draw it didn't hurt, but they got excited about it, and it became part of the plan. This is actually an example of these, and some of my students from here, from University of Hartford, came to this design charrette, which you can see. I'm just sort of drawing what they're describing, and they wanted a community center, and we did this in one Saturday. And then when it was time to present it to the group, I just sat back and let them take ownership of what we had created. I mean, I helped give it form, and I had them each sign it. And they just cherished this thing, and it became part of the plan for the future of their neighborhood. This is sort of a before and an after picture of what this street could be. To show you how this actual process works, you can see this is the before, it's kind of rough, and the people in this neighborhood, it's east side of Bridgeport, they wanted a city park here. So they looked at that, they told me they wanted a city park. I did some preliminary sketches, I did that sketch, it got included in the plan, adopted by the neighborhood organization, then adopted by the city council, adopted by the state legislature, was funded, and it's there now. So it's a cool process. It's this sort of, from the charrette, and there were architecture students from Yale there that were participating. It's a cool, and these folks are so appreciative. They're so excited. They don't deal with architects very often. This is a poorer part of the city, but there was, I think, 3.5, 4 years between when I did that charrette and the park is there. They use it. It's I think it's a very cool process. This was this is a Mill Hill neighborhood, but out of that sort of, the last one, the first one I volunteered, the second one I was part of a paid team. This one I was part of a paid team of planners, urban planners, and I did this drawing of a stretch of the river, which was pretty cool. We had uncovered some old railroad tracks to have Bridgeport's own High Line over here. We had some urban agriculture things going on in here. We ran these streets through, which don't now. Lots of interesting things. And it's cool working at this scale, too, in the city. This was an overall plan. That last area is this down in here. This is, I think this is the last project I'm going to show you, which is in my community. Let me show you the next plan. There's a park, a little city park, Ellsworth Park. This one was a blueprint of 1970-something. Tennis courts and a basketball court, and then 3 baseball fields. And this gradually over the decades has been taken over by the Little League, which is a great thing. My kids played in the Little League. But as the small neighborhood in Bridgeport, Black Rock, has gentrified, there's more people from Greenwich, Westport, etc., that are moving in that have a great appreciation for architecture and wanted the park to serve purposes beyond just baseball, Little League baseball and tennis. They wanted concerts at the park and theatrical performances and the way a city park can work. I happen to agree with that there can be a multi-purpose. The Little League got funding to build this little concession building that they sell hamburgers out of to pay for their fine. There's restaurants in it, there's storage in it. And, it's okay, but I thought, you know what, this thing could be so much more. And so once again, I jumped in. My wife is saying, Howard, you can't keep spending all this time without getting paid, but I was into it, so I did. And I decided to redesign the building. And these are some of my sketches. And I started to think about, well, where else could we put it on the property, and how could it do more than just serve burgers and store lawnmowers? And I thought, you know what, this thing could just be the landscape kind of warping up into a hill that could serve as a performance platform. Kids could sled down it. They could roll down it. They could sit on it like an amphitheater and watch the baseball games. They could, the older people could listen to music. And then back behind it, towards the baseball fields, could be the concession and storage. So these are hardline pencil drawings. This wasn't very big. This was like 11 by 17, this kind of size on tracing paper. I began to think about this little building. And this is what I came up with, which is this just sort of the park warps up on this hill. And you can see it's a performance platform. We dealt with these green walls and some ideas about erosion. And then back behind on this side is where the concession area is. This is a site plan of it here up again. They were going to put this concession building down here, and this is where more in the middle. This is back behind the concrete where the it's kind of cool too when you don't have a client, you can do whatever you want, you know, which is fun. This is a very simple floor plan of the building. These stairs with the trellis going up. And that's the aerial. So, and just to kind of close out, this is a little map we made. Actually, the New York Times was doing an article, and a little map that shows where we did work that we were paid for, which is the red, and where we did pro bono work in the city. And you can see there's a lot of blue, and a fair amount of red too. But it's the way my practice unfolded. You know, whether or not there was a paying project involved or not, I've always just jumped into it, started doing it, and something happens. Something comes out of that. So I encourage you guys to do the kind of work that you really want. My son just graduated from college with a sports management degree, and I happened to go to a family reunion, and one of my Mississippi relatives is a scout for the New England Patriots, and I said, would you talk to my son about how to get a job in sports? He said, sure. So they talked, and the guy said, Dan, you got to just decide what you want to do and just start doing it. Do it now. Don't wait. And Dan thought about that, and he said, you know what I want to do is I want to coach basketball. So he went to his college coach and said, I want to coach basketball. His coach said, great, you can help. It's going to be an internship. You don't get paid. So he works nights at a restaurant and works some part-time at a bar. But he's working towards actually a career in sports. And it's the same thing in architecture in my practice. The way my practice has worked is there's certain kinds of variety work that I wanted to do, and I just figured a way to start doing it. I didn't wait for a client to come to me. I just went, offered to help, and then eventually it leads to real commissions. And so I think we're at almost the very end. Oh yes, we're back to Commodore Isaac Chauncey, which some of my young fans thought I was Russell Crowe from Master and Commander, and I didn't tell them otherwise. So it's important to be involved in your community, do the kind of work you want. This is my opinion. Be Isaac Chauncey, Russell Crowe, what have you, and draw. You know, always draw. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Can't get away with that question. You do a variety of work, obviously, with the high-end clients and then the volunteer pro bono work.
Yeah.
Do you find a connection between those in some way? I mean, does sort of the economy of design with pro bono influence the high end or vice versa?
Well, they're both about, you know, human habitation. You know, there's a little bit more lavish lifestyle. The functional program for these 16,000 square foot house in Greenwich is different than a 1,300 square foot affordable apartment. But they both have kitchens and they both have bathrooms, and what I will say is that the folks that you're helping provide housing and the affordable housing it means so much to them to have. That to me is very gratifying. The other folks, they're my clients, so I appreciate that, but sometimes it's more about ego, big, and I wonder why somebody needs 7,000 square feet for just one guy, but that's okay. He wants to do it, I'll do it the best I can. I don't know if that answers your question. They're both design, they're both similar programs, but scale and complexity are different in the two. Yeah. See, I can't believe there's not one question. I hold the key to your architectural futures. I mean, I could share that with you.
No, which architect influenced you the most?
I have always loved Centerbrook's work. I mean, that model of this wonderful creative mix of people. They do a wonderful variety of stuff. I also interviewed with Richard Meyer to work on when I was young, apprenticing, and I've loved the sculptural quality of his work. But I guess the influence the most would be people like Robert Stern does a variety of work and has successful practice. You guys ought to go down and see one of the juries at Yale because he's there and he wears the pink socks and is quite a character. Which, Jim, we should start wearing pink socks at the juries, Yeah. But yeah, I would say Centerbrook and Robert Stern, They're not the edgiest architects, but they do a variety of work, which is something that I enjoy doing. It's interesting to me to do not a single building type, but I mean, I did a 60,000 square foot warehouse, I hadn't done one before, but had to have a big place to store hamburger buns before they went to 40 McDonald's. So those are the two, I would say, Stern and Centerbrook. Nothing. Some courage.
How did you develop your drawing hand-on skills that well?
That, what I do a lot, and that was a much bigger drawing, was I actually built this simple little SketchUp model that had, where all those little houses was. I'm trying to remember exactly how we did it. We just projected up these boxes, boom, 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 and we did it over a map, just the crudest sort of a computer model, and then I lay a piece of tracing paper and I start designing and refine it. But I mean, it's a quick massing model on the computer, and then I do the pen, and it's quick. And it can be very expressive. You can make decisions along the way. But I do that frequently. Sometimes I'll do just a completely freehand drawing. Sometimes I got a light table. I'll do it over a photograph over a photograph, do a drawing. But frequently between AutoCAD and SketchUp, it's easy to get the correct, proportions and massing for something. But then you can kind of, then I put roofs there. And you know what? This isn't totally accurate. I just made it up because I wanted it to look like houses. And I think there's a note somewhere in the bigger drawing that, houses restored. And these are gardens because I learned about, and happens in Detroit and other kind of cities that are struggling, the concept of sort of starting with urban gardens is a very affordable way of economic development in an urban area. But to answer your question, to get it accurate, I usually try to work over some kind of computer model to start. And you can learn that in my class next semester.
All right, thank you.
Yes?
Of all your pro bono work, which did you find to be the most rewarding?
Well, the most interesting is the museum stuff, but the most rewarding is, I'm telling you, you go into the east side of Bridgeport, I don't know if you guys know, but I'll bet you it's like the north end of Hartford, which is a pretty rough area when I've driven through it. These are good people, but they have very little. And, you know, they come to this school cafeteria, but they care about their neighborhood. They care about their children. They care about their safety of their children. And when I say to them, you know what, you can have, what do you guys want? What do you want here? A grocery store? You want a library? You want a daycare center? Tell us what you want. And I show them that, I do a little, all of us do a little presentation. I show them that example and others of the same process led to this other neighborhood getting the park they wanted. So if you tell me you want a community center, be as specific as you can and dream, you can get it. And to watch these people, they're so appreciative, and it means so much to them. They never deal with architects. I mean, wealthy people deal with architects. It's so new to them, but they care about where they live. And when they begin to see something take shape on paper, and they realize that it can lead to a real improvement in their neighborhood, to me that's very meaningful, that it's a skill that you guys are developing, that I'm still developing, that can change people's lives. I mean, it really can. It can make people's, I see them wheel their carriages down to that park now. You know, that has the most effect on me, you know, is that they appreciate it so much. And to them, the one woman that was, she became chair of our little group, and after it was done, she rolled up the drawing that I had made, and she treated it like it was some kind of precious scroll, you know, because we had to have it duplicated. And she said, I won't lose this. I'll make sure that I get it to the printer, and I'll be so careful. So I think that's pretty cool. I mean, you know, the rich people, you know, at Green is a little off to have the contractor redo it. You know, I don't want to be condescending about that, but I much prefer the helping where I can really help people with what I've learned.